people. Imi, thank you for being here with me. It's a pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So, because your work is all about intensity and sensitivity, I'd love to just kind of start there with you. Can you talk about what you mean when you talk about intense people, emotionally intense people, and maybe how that's different from highly sensitive people, if it is at all?
Oh, such a good question. Thank you for starting with that. Yes, I think a lot of people are confused. Obviously, the word highly sensitive has been around since Dr. Elaine Aron coined it, and many people, probably audience of your summit, are quite familiar with that. I use the word intensity. It's slightly different. Mm, I think, say in the original highly sensitive HSP, let's call it concept, sensitive people are usually described as being easily startled, they're advised to prioritize self-care. I think people often get the impression that they are kind of sensitive and vulnerable, like need to protect themselves. But I think the word intensity comes with a bit more passion and vigor. I think Dr. Elaine Aron covers, obviously, the two concepts do overlap. I think Dr. Elaine Aron covers the physical and emotional aspects of being intense very, very well. But to me, intensity also has an intellectual intensity to it and a spiritual dimension, which I don't think were addressed enough for me in the original HSP concept. If anything, I think intensity is closer to another concept known as overexcitabilities, which is usually used in the realm of talking about giftedness. But then if I use the word giftedness, people then get the wrong idea about, oh my God, that means I'm superior. It only applies to children. So I also don't use the word gifted very much, but overexcitabilities have got all these dimensions, which, I'm probably not going to go into now, but people can certainly look it up. And I have this on my website. I define intensity with 5 major areas. So these areas are, I'll just probably quickly talk through them without going into lots of details. Emotional depth and passion, deep empathy and sensitivity, which overlaps a lot with HSP concept. They are highly perceptive. They have rich inner world and very strong, vivid imagination. And they have strong creative potential, although that also means on the downside, they have quite a bit of existential angst to them. I mean, emotional depth and passion means you feel things very, very deeply. You might be called an old soul. And that is both positive and negative. Just get sucked into things and feel very, very deeply. And that could be quite lonely because even from a young age, you might realize that, oh, only I feel so strongly about something. People around me don't seem to. So there's that. So maybe from a young age, they already ask themselves the question, why do I feel so much? Why am I too much? That. But then obviously there's also the high aspect where when moved by a piece of music or art, they get really taken away and absorbed. So there's that, and they're also very sensitive, emotionally sensitive, very empathic, very sensitive to other people's changes in emotions, moods, and other people's needs. Another overlapping concept is that of boundaries. So not boundaries as in like weak boundaries as we often talk about it, but they have very thin energetic boundaries, meaning they go into the world and they feel very porous, like things get to them. So they're very sensitive to the environment. Like I'm very sensitive. I always wear earplugs and, text got cut off, that kind of thing. Yeah, but then they're also very perceptive, which is point number 3, where they feel, let's say they walk into the room, they can read the air, they're very perceptive, they can sense it when someone is upset, even when the other person doesn't admit it. They can often read hypocrisy and lies. Yeah. And they also have a rich inner world. They're very imaginative. If they didn't have a happy childhood, it's quite common for highly intense people to escape into a fantasy world of fiction and books and TV programs. I mean, these days, probably more like computer games. And yeah, I mean, I'm so old as compared. Yeah. So there's that. They might be drawn to spirituality from a young age. And even if they don't have a religious background, they may feel quite connected to, say, nature or something bigger than themselves. And usually, intense people have strong creative potential, but then that also means they can get into what I call existential crisis a lot. But they always feel like there's something they gotta be doing. They feel guilty if they're not moving fast enough, if they are just relaxing. There's this weight on the shoulder to solve the world's problems, which is related to very often a family role they then drop into playing, which is that of the family rescuer. But that's a separate issue. But they do often struggle with things like the artist's block, the writer's block, and procrastinations and that kind of things.
It's a beautiful overview. And as you're describing it, I'm thinking, check, 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 check. I check all those boxes. And I'm imagining many of the people listening to our conversation would resonate also, right? A summit like this, where we're talking about sensitivity and being an empath and being intuitive, we are generally more intense people, especially those of us who are looking to learn more and integrate these aspects of ourselves, right? So when I think about how you're describing it, you beautifully kind of shared some of like the upsides, some of the benefits, and some of the potential pitfalls. And so I'm curious, for you working in this field, what are some of the challenges that people come to you with as intense people? Like what problems are you helping them solve? How are you helping them navigate these aspects of themselves into like their purpose for being, into their work as intense people?
Maybe forever. Or obviously, this is what I do for a living, so that's all I deal with. But adding on to that, and probably related to this question, you asked me what's the difference between the HSP concept. Um, I think what is not talked about in the original concept, I mean, they probably do now, but originally, or maybe I haven't been exposed to it, there's this sense that people need to lower the degree of stimulation to be physically and emotionally protected. But the way I see it, intense people, yes, obviously they can get overstimulated. Like I said, I personally get stimulated too much by loud noises, strong smell. I always complain about people's perfume, even I do use them myself. Um, just rough surface, things like that. But intense people can also very easily get understimulated. I talk about burnout and bore out. So, being understimulated, especially intellectually, can also make an intense person quite depressed and unhealthy. Yeah, so that is another dimension that makes a difference. So that's a challenge I help people deal with, which is like, how do you find that sweet spot where you are engaged, stimulated enough, and not bored, but then also not overly stimulated where you're overwhelmed? That is so, so hard because a lot of intense people are also perfectionists and they're overly responsible. They feel like they need to be solving everyone's problems. Um, that and that is not just a work thing. Often it comes into relationship as well. So people would describe their partner as being, they often feel very guilty saying it, but sometimes people find that, oh, their partner are under engaging in certain aspects. Maybe their partner is really, really good in running life tasks together, but then spiritually it's just like mismatch. And it's not one is superior, inferior. It's not that. It's just different. And their partner might be intellectually way superior to them, but then spiritually very shut down, or emotionally just don't have the language. So there's that. So going back to the challenges, I think emotional regulation is one. I started my career as a psychotherapist, so that's one thing where I started working with people on very beginning, which is in learning how to deal with your intense emotions and mood swings, especially when you were younger. I think younger people really struggle with that. I mean, neuroscience has now told us that our prefrontal cortex literally were not formed properly when we were younger. I could resonate with that. When I was younger, everything felt like a huge roller coaster because they are so sensitive to all sorts of stimulants and external input. So it's really challenging for them to regulate their emotions. loneliness because they feel, well, there are many reasons for it. They don't feel like they fit in, they feel very different, but they don't know why. But the intensity also leads to loneliness because I'm feeling these things. The other person don't know. We're watching the same film. Why am I the only one who feels so much and cries so much? And sensory overstimulation, how to manage that in the real world and not be so criticized and misunderstood. Perfectionism is a big one. I think many intense people I work with have a strong desire for perfection in everything, their work, who they are, which paradoxically leads to things like procrastination, anxiety, imposter syndrome, social anxiety, because they want to make sure they are doing the right thing when actually there's no right thing. Um, yeah, being seen or being caught as too much, which makes them internalize a lot of shame. So they walk around the world wondering if there's something wrong with them. I call it the wound of being too much, which I talk about quite a lot. Yeah. Executive functioning. Now, that's not everyone, but some people really struggle with task switching because there's so many things they want to do, ideas are jumping here, there, back and forth. It doesn't necessarily mean they have ADHD. They just have a very fast brain, and the existing system may not cater to them. So when there is a mismatch between the environment and their brain, there could be lots of functioning issues. Impulsivity is related to that. See, I call it impulsivity is already quite negative. Like it's always like, oh, you're impulsive. When actually they're just fast and they probably make intuitive decisions very quickly. And other people see it as impulsive when actually their brain has already gone through a process of discernment and they know what they're doing. So there's that, this mismatch causes a lot of self-doubt as well. Burnout, like I said earlier. Yeah, so there are more, but I think these are some of the main themes.
Yeah, as you're describing all of these difficulties that intense people might face, I'm thinking, yes, they all sound familiar. I personally may or may not have experienced all of them, but they certainly sound like what I hear from sensitive, intense people, the challenges that they deal with. And I think you did a really beautiful job of explaining why we have these challenges. And if we can even just sort of step back and think about, for example, perfectionism, and thinking about how it can lead to this paradox of procrastination or anxiety, that just giving it a little bit of space and looking at it, that it can almost soften it to some degree. And so I
Yeah.
wonder about the work that you do with emotionally intense people. How do you help them soften these challenges? Are there certain strategies that you use? Do you just help them kind of reframe how they're thinking about things, or do you actually use certain modalities to help them shift it? What's your experience been?
Oh, there's so much I can say about that. But adding adding to that, the question you just asked, a lot of the problems actually are caused by attempts to solve the original problems. So the things got layered on, like okay, you're different, you feel different, you feel internalized shame, and then in defense of the shame, you become avoidant, or you're overly self-soothe, and then it just gets more and more complicated like that. Yeah. So there's that. So it's about untangling it to the roots of it. I don't like talking. I mean, yeah, there are, but I really don't quite, sometimes I don't like talking just about strategies and things. I often tell clients I really don't do things like cognitive behavioral therapy. They like to know that there is a protocol, but I don't actually have like a rigid, like, okay, let's do this exercise and then you'll be done. Because I really believe in an organic relational process where we enter a space together and we see what emerges. There are themes, like I've just drawn out, that are common amongst people, but everyone is really so different. And it's really, really not linear. So, yes, I can have a vague roadmap as though there are steps, but it's not dun, 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 and then I graduate. Bola, I think that's very our culture really likes that, but it's a kind of false sense of certainty. But there are still a lot I can say to answer your question. To add on to the difficulties, it's a family role thing. Now, not everyone, but what I see as a repetitive pattern is a lot of highly sensitive and intense people get into particular family roles within their family. I don't know if you're familiar with, like, everyone has got like a role in the family. Some people are like the clown, some people are the mediator, some people are the problem solver. It's fine. We all have these family roles. But a healthy family system, in a healthy family system, these roles should be flexible. Like, okay, I have a tendency towards, I like problem solving, or I'm funny. But if I'm always just a clown and no one takes me seriously, that's problematic. If I'm just a problem solver and no one tries to solve my problem, that's problematic. So what I find is a lot of sensitive and intense people, because of their capacity and their sensitivity, they get parentified a lot. So the word parentified, that's like falsified, parentified, they become like a little parent, a little grown up from a young age. They could be doing physical parentification. They could be subject to physical parentification where they are running errands, taking care of their younger siblings, doing all the shopping, taking people to dentists, da da da. Or they're emotionally parentified, which is more common, where in a very subtle way, they become the family counselor, the family therapist, the one that everyone goes to. It's not usually not, sometimes, yes, there are alcoholic and abusive parents. Sometimes it's not because anyone is being horrible, it's unconscious. They just automatically took on that role because they can. So there is that part to it. And a lot of the time, what I help people do is to undo the trauma caused by parentification, and reclaiming their life. They often take on that role and they find themselves stretched really thin, and their own needs and identities get overshadowed from a young age. So they could reach middle adulthood and get very confused. Who I am, what do I really want? Who am I outside of taking care of my family? So I'm helping them to find their own aspirations, their desires, ability to care for themselves again, setting healthier boundaries with their parents or their siblings. And it doesn't mean it's not cold. It's not cold to set boundaries. Healthy boundaries actually bring you closer, because then you nurture your own growth. And then when you're with the other person, you don't feel like you're there to rescue them. You're genuinely enjoying a time together. So it's a process of redefining their role within the family and acknowledging that they themselves also deserve the same care and respect and attention that they've been giving to everyone else. Midlife crisis and existential crisis is a big theme that people come to me for. Many people reach a certain age and realize, I don't want to be a software engineer, or my job is boring. Why am I doing this? I don't want to be an accountant. I'm only doing this because it's secure and that's what my parents wanted me to do. And they've set aside their own passion and interest and dimming that radiant intensity that so few the creativity and ambitions that they originally had. So this is a process of unpeeling a lot of society and family pressure. And to help them do that is to guide them to relearn how to play without being a perfectionist, but embracing the messy middle, the imperfect, the unpredictable things, and to reclaim a childlike sense of wonder. Modalities wise, as I said earlier, I believe in the relational process and seeing how things unfold. But I was also trained I was trained in Buddhism. It doesn't mean I'm a Buddhist or I preach anything, but I quite like using some spiritual principles. I'm also trained as an art therapist. So sometimes, again, it doesn't mean you need to make things pretty or use crayons. No. It's just the way I see art therapy is I define it very loosely. I think just connecting to pictures, connecting to symbols in your life, connecting to what I call archetypes are some very powerful ways we can work together. And I can talk more about the archetypes and, even suggest a few exercises people can do in their own time if you want.
can you share some of what those exercises might look like? Because I'm thinking, as I'm listening to you talk about some of the challenges that you help people with, my hunch is many of the people listening are saying, yes, me too, that's me. So if you could share some of the art therapy practices that you use, that would be really interesting, especially if we could integrate them in our own homes, our own lives, in our own time.
Yeah, absolutely. I can talk through it. So symbolism and archetypes are some elements of it. And I don't know if people are familiar with the word archetypes, they probably are. They are universal symbols and patterns, things that we can all intuitively understand. We have a tendency to interpret very literally, but it really doesn't. Like for instance, in all of us, there will be a defined father, defined mother. It's not literal. So some of the archetypes that commonly emerge in my work would be, say, the hero's journey, the wise sage in you. Like I help people connect to the wisest part of themselves, which could be from a bunch of things they've learned from mentors, guides, or they can even envision their older selves as the wise figures to guide them. Their inner child, like I would ask people to draw, to use picture or collages, or just allow themselves to play like a child and make mistakes and have a thirst for discovery, discover beauty moments. So these are ways they can connect to some parts of themselves. And it's very good for, working through past wounds as well, and describe their old wounds in pictures or use symbols to represent their own innocence and vulnerability and all that. Exploring their own masculine and feminine side as well. So these are all, things people can do in their own time. They can gather pictures, do collages, can then ask themselves questions like, what does this symbol mean to me? How does it relate to my current life situation? It's a bit like tarot card reading. Yeah. And the goal really is to dive deeper into what's underneath in your unconscious and then integrate these back into your life. Another thing is when I say art, I don't just mean drawing. There's sculpting, but I also include things like photography and even poetry. Yeah. So, why don't I talk through two exercises that I sometimes have people do? Cool. So one is, I mean, one of them I can just tell you what it is. The other one I can slowly walk through it. So if people want to, they can even slow down the video and watch it again and maybe do it alongside. So one is called the Russian door exercise, which I talk about how people absorb all these energies from others and have thin boundaries and take on family roles. Well, the Russian door exercise is to work out the layers of you. So in your visual journal, I want you to outline 5 Russian doors, like empty. You can probably find something like that on the internet. And then use some coloring pen to fill them in. And in a visual way, just play with it. Try not to be perfectionistic about it. Draw outside of the line is totally fine. And it's about drawing 5 Russian doors that represent 5 different parts of you. And these are the parts of you that everyone sees, the you that people imagine you to be when they first met you, so their first impression, the parts of you that the close friends and the loved ones see, the parts that only the person closest to you see, and the parts that only you see. And you can play with this. Yeah, so I think that's a very good visual exercise to sometimes have people do that and then we discuss it together and then explore, what does this heart being located in this area mean? What does the color red mean to you? Things like that. And the other exercise, which I find to be very powerful, and I use it alongside dream journaling as well, is called the I Am Poetry. And this is really about being spontaneous and playful and bring out the spontaneous childlike side of you. And I always have to tell people, listen, remember, there's no right or wrong, no right or wrong. And so there are these prompts that are probably beginning of sentences that they fill in. I think, again, you can probably find prompts like that online, but the ones that I use are, if people want to, they can even just start, writing it down, really slow it down. And no right or wrong, whatever comes to you at that moment is what is meaningful to your subconscious at that moment. I am, I hear, I see. These are just to help people ground themselves in the present moment. And then we start to go deeper. I long for. Right now, I feel. I really don't want to feel. I pretend to be. What worries me the most is. What I deeply want is. I try to. I dream that I can. What I know for sure is. And so on. And then they reread it, and then they pick a few that jump out at them, and then ask themselves, is there anything about that that is worth exploring more? Is there something about that's very powerful, surprising, or revealing to them something that they didn't know about themselves? And then they can even make further artwork about it if they want to. But that often itself is quite enough to spark a lot of thoughts.
Wow, what beautiful exercises. So, of course, I have a couple of refining questions to make sure that I'm doing it perfectly, even though these are meant to be imperfect exercises, right? So, when you were talking about the Russian dolls, I love um, the visual of sort of like the most external display of who we are, getting to this most really kind of private, intimate experience of who we are. And so are you saying that you would encourage people to sort of take these 5 dolls and just color them in
Yeah,
intuitively in whatever way feels intuitive? And then once they're colored in, sort of reflect on it and explore
yeah.
what am why did I choose these colors here? And what does this feel like for me? And then in that experience, sort of more emerges. It's almost like this exercise is an opportunity for us to peel back some of the layers and then really sit with ourselves after. Am I getting it right?
Exactly. It's really, really fun. And sometimes we don't even have to be that mechanical. Maybe nothing comes out of it. Then it's fine. Like maybe your subconscious isn't ready. Just put it aside and see what happens in a month's time. Or maybe in a month's time still nothing happens. Then, it's okay. It's all an experiment. I used to call them homework, and then I really hate it because I don't want clients to think I'm a school teacher. So now I just call them experiments, like experiments with them.
I love the idea of the experiments um, and this other really beautiful I am poetry that you were talking about. What lovely prompts to allow things to kind of come out that we might be holding on tight to. The more I hear you talk about this concept of intensity, the more I'm really identifying with the perfectionism. And I don't know if this is something that you see with the people that you work with, but for me personally, it almost feels like the perfectionism is hidden. Like some people are perfectionists and they're very aware of it. But I think some of us might be like clandestine perfectionists where it's hidden really deep down and we're not even connected to the perfectionism because as I'm listening to you share these exercises or these explorations, I'm thinking, well, how am I going to do it perfectly? What is it supposed to look like? And what I'm really hearing you say is it's just meant to be, just be with it and see what comes from it. And if nothing comes, that's also right. Nothing has to come from it. So I'm curious
That's right.
about this sort of concept of hidden perfectionism. Is that something that you see? Do you think all of us have perfectionistic tendencies? Some of it is more overt than others, or are some of us not really perfectionists and that's okay
Do
too?
you usually see yourself as a perfectionist?
Probably not, but I identify with this idea of procrastinating or having anxiety about doing certain
Mm,
things because I want to do them well or
yeah.
right or successfully,
See,
which
I
I
think,
is
yeah.
perfectionism.
Yeah. See, I don't think it's meaningful to say I'm a perfectionist or I'm not. But yes, I think perfectionism is behind many things that we don't realize. Even this idea that there is a right or wrong way of doing everything. It's kind of a bit problematic. Wanting to follow a script, wanting to follow the society script could be a form of perfectionism. I mean, it really depends on how you define it. Mm. And I think related to that, especially if you had a chaotic childhood where you felt misunderstood a lot, it's a strong need for control. And that manifests a lot as this perfectionistic tendencies where there's this illusion that if I get things right, then I can control my fate. Then I can avoid the same pain that I went through when I was a child. It's all unconscious. You don't literally think that. But then unconsciously, we all think we have this godlike power to control things where, if I'm careful enough, I will never be crushed by a car when actually I could be, obviously you lower the likelihood that you can be the most careful, healthiest human. And things can still happen. We don't have ultimate control.
I think for me also, as I'm hearing you talk about it, sort of circling back to something that you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation around this swing between burnout and bored out. I think as a sensitive, intense person, I have a tendency to control because I'm trying to control circumstances and sensory input so that I am not overstimulated or over aroused or too under aroused, and that um, attempt to control circumstances, I think dovetails with perfectionism as I'm listening to you talk about
Yeah.
it. And I
Yeah.
think, as people who are just more impacted by our environment, we might have a tendency to want to control so that we are controlling our inner world, but controlling the outer world is really, it's like a misappropriated use of our energy. Yeah.
Yes. And controlling other people. Like a lot of things we say that sounds very benign, underneath it is a need to control our environment. Like, I don't want to hurt people's feelings. Yes, of course, you try to do your best. We don't have the ultimate control over everything. You want a relationship to go well. You want to be kind. You will be generous. You'll be empathic. But then we can't control the outcome.
Right. Yeah.
I'm saying something that people really don't want to hear.
You're saying something that maybe some people don't want to hear, but as you're saying it, for me, there's a real empowerment in it because it's bringing the unconscious forward so that it doesn't kind of propel us from the shadows. It's bringing it all into the light so that we are aware of what's driving our motivations and our behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one last question that I have for you, and we've sort of already touched on it, but can you speak just a little bit to the gifts of intensity, to the upside of being intense? I know that you talked about creativity and empathy. I'm just curious, once you've worked with somebody who's come to you and they're struggling, once they're kind of done, quote unquote, with their work with you, what are you seeing in them? How are they showing up in their life and in the world?
Mm. Well, in terms of the upside of being intense, I think I went through them, sprinted through them very quickly in the beginning about the sensitivity, feeling deeply, being perceptive, having a rich imaginary world, being able to integrate intellectual concepts with deep feelings to come up with something new. Um, so there's all of that. But yes, when someone can really embrace their intensity, let me think, they get feistier. They enjoy the intensity. They go, well, this is me. They learn to shrug their shoulder. They become very confident, creative leaders. Because actually, a lot of intense people have got very high cognitive abilities. And when they combine that with their emotional sensitivity and imaginative qualities, that makes a really rare, good leader. Because they have a strong capacity for learning. They absorb information, a lot of them, very quickly. And then they make all these complex connections between concepts and ideas. And so if they can combine all of that, that really make them thrive in their own way and really impact other people in a very unique way. And growth, I think a lot of intense people are very introspective. So they like to reflect and continue to grow and I want to use the word perfect themselves. No, they continue to grow and become the best they can be. Yeah.
I love your reframing of perfectionism into being the best that we can be. That really is what it is. I think you just nailed it. It's shifting away from being perfect, because
Yeah.
even the concept of perfection is flawed, right? By nature, it's sort of like
The
a
way,
dragon chasing its tail.
yeah, the way my therapist like to say is you're always perfect because
Yeah.
you're always the perfect you at this very given moment. And then you'll be a next perfect in the next moment. But you're always a perfect configuration of where you are, who you are at this very given moment.
It's so beautiful. I love it. So, for people who are listening who are thinking, "Ooh, I want to work with Imi. She's who I need in my life." Can you share a little bit about how people can work with you, learn from you?
Sure. So I have two books out if people want to know a bit more about these concepts. The first one is called Emotional Sensitivity and Intensity. That's a bit more popular. In the second one, The Gift of Intensity, I'm a bit more direct in the approach of it. But then most of my stuff are on a website called eggshelltherapy.com. So I no longer do therapy. I do coaching and consultation now, but people can certainly still work with me. They can send me a message through the website. It's called Eggshell like an egg with the shell, therapy.com. I do have a YouTube channel where I interview people from time to time. I do have a Facebook page where I release some shorter pieces of writing they're quite different from the longer informative stuff. Yeah, so those are the ways to find me.
Nice. And do you still have a podcast that you're doing?
Yeah, so that overlaps a bit with the YouTube channel.
Nice. I know about your podcast because I had the pleasure of being a guest on it once. It's really lovely. So
You were
before,
my first guest, I think.
yeah, I think I was. Yeah, it was lovely to help you kind of kick it off. And your work is so important and so unique and gentle and loving and healing. And I'm really grateful for what you do because you've really impacted a lot of people in their ability to become who they're meant to be and heal from the wounds of their childhood.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for saying I'm gentle, but when I work with people and, warning people who might want to approach me, I'm becoming more and more direct in my approach. So I do challenge people and I can be quite direct in the way I say things. I don't mean to be horrible, but I could be direct, and not everyone likes that. It's okay, we don't all gel together, and there might be more people might find. I do encourage people to shop around, and because chemistry is really quite important. But yeah, I would love to work with people who want to thrive as an intense person.
So beautiful. So, Amy, before we have to say goodbye, I'm curious if there's anything that you didn't have a chance to share in our conversation that feels really important, or if you just want to leave listeners with a little takeaway, a little golden nugget that you think they should kind of keep in their back pocket to remember on the more challenging days.
Yeah, I haven't thought about this. I don't think there are any particular things I need to add because your questions are very thorough. But really, if people are really struggling with this, it's just really okay to walk your own path. I know it sounds so cliche, be you, everyone else is taken, that kind of thing. But it's taken me a long time to realize it's really okay to have my own path. It's hard when everyone else around you are doing different things and seem to subscribe to different ideas and lifestyles. So find people who align with your values and be brave to live out something that's different to the script that has been laid down by others.
So beautiful. Thank you, Emmy. Thank you for your time and your wisdom. Thank you to everybody who joined us for this session. Bye for
Thank
now.
you.